What happens when the place meant to save a life becomes the final chapter? Hollywood has always sold the image that money and fame can buy the best care, but these stories prove status offers no guarantee. Some stars pass during procedures. Others survive the operation only to lose their lives to documented complications, hours or days later. If you enjoy factual stories from the hidden side of celebrity history, subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications. Number 1. Joan Rivers. Few television personalities seemed as unstoppable as the woman who could turn almost any uncomfortable subject into comedy. And by 2014, Joan Rivers had spent decades surviving career setbacks, criticism, reinventions, and the changing tastes of show business. Yet her final crisis began with what appeared to be an ordinary medical appointment. During a procedure in New York to examine problems involving her voice and throat, Rivers was placed under sedation. Complications developed when her oxygen level dropped, and she went into cardiac arrest during the procedure. She was transferred to Mount Sinai Hospital and remained in critical condition. For days, fans hoped the 81-year-old comedian would recover. Her daughter Melissa eventually announced that Rivers had passed away on September 4, 2014. Medical findings later described brain damage caused by a lack of oxygen. The shocking part was the setting. This was not a dangerous movie stunt or a dramatic public emergency. It started inside a medical clinic during a procedure that millions of people would never imagine becoming life-threatening. Number 2. Bill Paxton. To movie fans, he had already survived aliens, tornadoes, the Titanic, and countless screen disasters. Real life, however, presented Bill Paxton with a challenge no Hollywood script could rewrite. In February 2017, the 61-year-old actor entered Cedars-Sinai Medical Center for heart surgery. The planned operation involved replacing an aortic valve and repairing an aortic aneurysm. Paxton came through the initial procedure, but serious complications followed. Days later, he experienced a stroke. On February 25th, his family confirmed that the star of Aliens, Twister, Titanic, Apollo 13, and Big Love had passed away. The announcement stunned Hollywood because Paxton was still working steadily and appeared energetic to the public. His final film roles were still reaching audiences when the news broke. His story is also an important reminder about the wording of this list. Paxton did not simply die on an operating table. His death followed complications associated with major cardiovascular surgery, showing how the danger can continue even after an operation itself has ended. Before we continue, subscribe if you want more carefully researched celebrity stories without the usual recycled rumors. Your support helps us keep digging into the real history behind the famous names. Number 3. John Ritter. 1 minute, television audiences knew him as one of America's most naturally funny performers. The next, his family and colleagues were facing a medical emergency almost nobody had expected. On September 11, 2003, John Ritter became seriously ill while working on the sitcom 8 Simple Rules. He was taken to a hospital after experiencing symptoms that were initially difficult to diagnose. Doctors eventually discovered an aortic dissection, a dangerous tear involving the body's main artery. Emergency surgery followed as physicians attempted to repair the damage. Despite their efforts, Ritter could not be saved. He was 54, and just days away from his 55th birthday. The loss hit television viewers particularly hard because Ritter's cheerful public image felt almost permanent. From Three's Company to his later family comedies, he had built a career around warmth, physical comedy, and an ability to make embarrassment seem charming. What makes his final hours especially haunting is how quickly everything changed. A normal working day became an emergency operation, and one of television's most familiar faces was suddenly gone. Number 4. Steve McQueen. By the beginning of the 1980s, the man once marketed as Hollywood's ultimate symbol of cool was desperately searching for another chance. Steve McQueen had been diagnosed with mesothelioma, and conventional doctors had given him an extremely poor outlook. Instead of accepting that prognosis quietly, the 50-year-old actor traveled to Mexico and pursued alternative treatments. Eventually, he underwent an operation intended to remove a large tumor. Physicians in the United States had reportedly warned that his condition made major surgery extremely risky. The procedure was completed, but McQueen's weakened body could not withstand what followed. Roughly 12 hours later, he suffered a heart attack and passed away on November 7, 1980. It was an unusually private ending for someone whose image had been built on fearless action. Audiences remembered the motorcycle chase in The Great Escape, the streets of Bullitt, and the icy confidence of the Thomas Crown affair. Yet behind that tough image was a man trying almost anything for more time. His final gamble was not performed for cameras, and there was no stunt double waiting nearby. Number 5. Andy Warhol. Nothing about Andy Warhol's life looked ordinary, which makes the apparently routine nature of his final operation seem even more surprising. The artist who transformed soup cans, celebrities, and commercial imagery into high art had avoided dealing with gallbladder problems for years. By February 1987, surgery could no longer easily be postponed. Warhol entered New York Hospital and underwent an operation to remove his gallbladder. Initial reports suggested the procedure had gone well. He was awake afterward, and there was no immediate public reason to expect disaster. But during the night, his condition changed. On the morning of February 22nd, the 58-year-old artist was found unresponsive and could not be revived. The news seemed almost impossible. Warhol had survived being shot in 1968 and had lived for years with the lasting physical consequences. Friends later described how deeply medical settings frightened him. That fear gives his final chapter an unsettling irony. After surviving one of the most dramatic attacks in modern art history, Warhol ultimately passed away following an operation that many people undergo successfully every year. Number 6. Neil Armstrong. Few human beings have faced a moment watched by more people than Neil Armstrong stepping onto the moon. He had flown experimental aircraft, survived dangerous missions, and become the first person to walk on another world. Yet decades later, his final battle took place far from any spacecraft. In August 2012, the 82-year-old former astronaut underwent cardiovascular procedures after doctors discovered heart problems. His family subsequently announced that Armstrong had died from complications resulting from those procedures. The news immediately traveled around the world. For generations who remembered Apollo 11, Armstrong represented calmness under pressure. Even when the lunar module was running dangerously low on fuel during its descent, his voice remained controlled. That made his death after medical treatment feel particularly cruel to admirers. A man who had survived test flights and space exploration had reached old age, only to encounter serious complications while receiving treatment for his heart. His family called him a reluctant American hero, an appropriate description of someone who rarely seemed comfortable turning his achievement into celebrity. The circumstances of his death remain part of the complicated final chapter of an extraordinary life. Number 7. George Segal. For more than half a century, his relaxed humor made even the most ordinary scene entertaining. George Segal moved easily between serious films and television comedy, reaching one generation through Who's Afraid of Virginia Woolf and another through Just Shoot Me and The Goldbergs. In March 2021, his wife Sonia announced news that surprised fans who had recently been watching him on television. The 87-year-old actor had passed away due to complications from bypass surgery. Segal had continued appearing as Albert Pops Solomon on The Goldbergs well into his 80s. His character's playful personality made him feel less like a television veteran and more like a mischievous relative audiences had known their entire lives. There was no long public farewell tour and no extended period in which viewers prepared themselves for his absence. The announcement simply arrived, revealing that a surgical procedure had been followed by complications his body could not overcome. His death left the Goldbergs with an emotional absence, while decades of movie lovers remembered the rare performer who could be funny, vulnerable, romantic, and dramatic without ever appearing to force the moment. Number 8. Myrna Loy Long. Before celebrity culture became an industry, one elegant screen star had already mastered the art of seeming effortlessly sophisticated. Myrna Loy appeared in more than 100 films and became permanently associated with witty, intelligent characters, especially opposite William Powell in the Thin Man series. By the time she reached her late 80s, Loy had been away from regular acting for years, but remained one of the most beloved figures of classic Hollywood. Her life ended in New York on December 14, 1993. According to biographical information preserved by the Myrna Loy Center, the 88-year-old actress died during surgery. For old Hollywood fans, the circumstances added a somber final line to an extraordinary career. Loy had successfully moved from silent-era appearances and exotic supporting roles into sophisticated comedy, drama, and later respected character work. She had also outlived many of the actors who defined her generation. There is something particularly striking about such a quiet ending. No movie premiere, studio scandal, or dramatic public scenes surrounded it. One of Hollywood's most graceful stars simply entered a medical setting and never returned, leaving the films to preserve the energy audiences had loved for decades. Number 9. James Avery. For millions of viewers, Uncle Phil was more than a sitcom character. He was the stern voice, protective father figure, and emotional center who gave the Fresh Prince of Bel-Air much of its heart. Away from that famous role, James Avery was an accomplished stage performer and voice actor whose unmistakable voice appeared across animation and television. Near the end of 2013, the 68-year-old actor underwent open-heart surgery in California. Complications followed, and Avery passed away on December 31st. The timing made the announcement especially painful. As much of the world prepared to welcome a new year, former cast members and fans were learning that someone associated with one of television's happiest sitcoms was gone. Will Smith later remembered the enormous influence Avery had on him as a young performer. The relationship viewers saw between Will and Uncle Phil had produced several of the series' most emotional scenes, including moments that still circulate decades later. Avery's final days were private, but the reaction to his passing showed how deeply his work had entered popular culture. What began as heart treatment ended with a loss felt across generations of television viewers. Number 10. Rod Serling. Long before television became obsessed with shocking twists, one writer had already perfected them. Rod Serling's voice introduced audiences to strange towns, frightened travelers, mysterious objects, and moral traps every week on The Twilight Zone. Behind that controlled narration, however, his health was becoming increasingly serious. A longtime heavy smoker, Serling suffered cardiovascular problems and experienced multiple heart attacks. In 1975, doctors determined that major treatment was necessary. He underwent open-heart surgery, but his condition remained critical afterward. 2 days later, on June 28, Serling passed away at only 50 years old. The loss cut short the life of one of television's most influential writers when he was still young enough to create decades of additional work. Perhaps there is an eerie quality to the circumstances, because Serling spent so much of his career writing about ordinary people suddenly crossing invisible lines between normal life and the unexpected. Number 11. Donda West. Behind Kanye West's rise from ambitious Chicago producer to international superstar stood a mother who had encouraged his creativity long before the world knew his name. Donda West was not merely Kanye's mother. She had built her own career in education, becoming an English professor and later chairing an academic department. In November 2007, the 58-year-old underwent several cosmetic procedures in California, including breast reduction, liposuction, and abdominal surgery. She returned home afterward, but her condition deteriorated the following day. Emergency services were eventually called, and West was taken to a hospital, where she could not be revived. The Los Angeles County coroner later concluded that coronary artery disease and multiple post-operative factors contributed to her death, while the exact way the separate factors interacted could not be determined with certainty. Her passing became a major public story partly because her son was approaching the height of his fame. It also generated widespread discussion about cosmetic procedures, pre-existing medical risks, and post-operative monitoring. For Kanye, however, this was not a media debate. He had lost the woman he repeatedly described as one of the most important influences in his life. Number 12. Anthony Geary. Soap operas rarely create characters who remain famous for nearly half a century, but Luke Spencer became one of those exceptions. His adventures, romances, disappearances, and returns helped transform General Hospital, while Anthony Geary collected a record-setting 8 Daytime Emmy Awards for his performance. After leaving regular television work, the actor settled in Amsterdam and largely stepped away from the Hollywood spotlight. That made the announcement of his death in December 2025 especially unexpected for longtime viewers. According to reporting by the Associated Press, Geary died at 78 from complications connected with a surgical procedure he had undergone 3 days earlier. For fans, the circumstances contrasted sharply with Luke Spencer's almost impossible durability. The character had survived mobsters, accidents, elaborate conspiracies, and decades of daytime drama. The performer behind him lived far more privately. His departure from General Hospital in 2015 had already felt like the closing of an era. Geary had spent more than 40 years associated with a character whose wedding to Laura became one of the most watched moments in American daytime television. A decade later, viewers received a much more permanent goodbye. Number 13. Richard Griffiths. Some actors dominate a scene by shouting. Richard Griffiths could do it simply by entering the room. His enormous theatrical skill made him respected in Britain long before younger audiences discovered him as Vernon Dursley, Harry Potter's unpleasant uncle. He also earned major stage honors for The History Boys and appeared in films ranging from Withnail and I to Hugo. In March 2013, Griffiths underwent heart surgery in Coventry, England. Complications followed, and the 65-year-old actor passed away. Daniel Radcliffe was among those who paid tribute, remembering how Griffiths had supported him both during the Harry Potter films and when the young star later made his stage debut in Equus. That generosity was less visible to the public than Griffiths' frequently grumpy screen characters. Friends and fellow actors described someone whose wit and warmth were very different from Vernon Dursley's impatience. His death arrived just as another generation had begun discovering the depth of his stage career. The operation had been intended to address a serious medical problem, but instead it became his final medical chapter. As with so many people in this list, the danger did not come from a film set or public spectacle. It emerged from the very treatment meant to improve or preserve his health. Number 14. Mac Davis. Before many listeners knew his face, they already knew his words. Mac Davis wrote songs recorded by Elvis Presley, including In the Ghetto and A Little Less Conversation, before becoming a successful recording artist, actor, television host, and songwriter in his own right. By September 2020, Davis was 78 but still remembered as one of country music's most charismatic entertainers. His family announced that he had become critically ill after undergoing heart surgery. On September 29th, news arrived that Davis had passed away following complications associated with the procedure. The reaction spread far beyond Nashville because his career had never fit neatly into one category. He could write serious social commentary for Presley and then appear on television with the easy confidence of a variety show star. He also crossed into movies and remained a recognizable figure long after his biggest chart successes. For longtime fans, the sudden nature of the news was difficult to process. There had been no lengthy public countdown to his final days. Instead, a heart procedure intended to address a serious health problem was followed by complications, and an entertainer whose songs had survived generations was suddenly being discussed in the past tense. Number 15. Frank Vincent. Anyone who watched enough gangster movies eventually learned one rule. When Frank Vincent entered a scene, trouble was probably not far behind. His hard-edged screen presence made him unforgettable in Martin Scorsese films including Raging Bull, Goodfellas, and Casino. A later generation knew him as Phil Leotardo, one of the most intimidating characters in The Sopranos. In September 2017, Vincent suffered a heart attack and required medical treatment. He subsequently underwent heart surgery. Complications followed, and he passed away at 78. The irony was hard to miss. On screen, Vincent specialized in characters who seemed almost permanently angry, dangerous, and difficult to remove. Off-screen, colleagues described a working actor and musician who had spent decades carefully building a career from supporting roles. His passing also arrived during a period when The Sopranos was increasingly being recognized as one of television's defining dramas. Fans revisiting the series were once again encountering Phil Leotardo's icy threats and dark humor. Behind that immortal screen image, however, Vincent's final days were painfully ordinary. A heart attack, an operation intended to help, and complications his body could not overcome. Number 16. Howard Hesseman. At a time when television teachers were usually portrayed as strict authority figures, Howard Hesseman became famous for something completely different. As Dr. Johnny Fever on Crip in Cincinnati, he played a rebellious radio personality whose dry humor made him one of late 1970s television's most recognizable counterculture figures. Years later, Head of the Class introduced him to another generation as teacher Charlie Moore. In January 2022, Hesseman died at 81. His representative said the actor passed away from complications following colon surgery performed months earlier. That detail surprised viewers because Hesseman had largely disappeared from the everyday celebrity news cycle. Like many veteran performers, he had quietly accumulated a huge list of credits while the audience moved on to newer shows. The medical complications brought that long career suddenly back into focus. Tributes reminded viewers that Hesseman's relaxed rebelliousness on WCRP had been more than a comic gimmick. His character reflected the changing culture of American radio, television, and music in the 1970s. The role worked because Hesseman understood that world personally. Before becoming widely known as an actor, he had even worked as a radio disc jockey. His final months were much quieter than the noisy fictional radio station that made him famous. Number 17. Gregory Itzin. For viewers of 24, the face of Gregory Itzin could instantly trigger suspicion. His portrayal of President Charles Logan turned political weakness, ambition, and betrayal into one of the thriller's most memorable performances. Yet Itzin's career stretched far beyond one famous villain. For decades, he moved through theater, film, and television, appearing in everything from Star Trek productions to The Mentalist and Nolsis. In July 2022, the 74-year-old actor died following complications connected to emergency surgery. The announcement came through people who had worked closely with him, and tributes emphasized both his stage accomplishments and the personality audiences rarely saw behind his darker roles. Itzin had earned Emmy nominations for playing Logan because he resisted the temptation to make the character simply evil. Instead, he presented a frightened, insecure political figure whose decisions became increasingly destructive. That ability to make weakness frightening became the defining screen achievement of his career. His death, however, contained none of the elaborate twists associated with 24. There was an urgent medical situation, an emergency operation, and complications from which he did not recover. For actors with decades of supporting work, one role can sometimes overshadow everything else. Itzin seemed comfortable with that reality, but colleagues knew his range was much larger. Number 18. Anthony Minghella. Very few directors manage to create massive Hollywood success without losing the feeling of intimacy in their films. Anthony Minghella did exactly that. The English Patient turned him into an Academy Award-winning director, while the talented Mr. Ripley and Cold Mountain established his reputation for visually beautiful stories built around complicated human relationships. In March 2008, Minghella entered a London hospital for surgery related to cancer affecting his tonsils and neck. Reports indicated that the operation itself had initially gone well. Then something went terribly wrong. A hemorrhage developed following the procedure, and Minghella died at only 54. The news shocked the film industry because he was still actively producing, directing, and developing projects. Unlike an elderly star whose career had gradually wound down, Minghella appeared to have decades of filmmaking ahead of him. Actors and collaborators remembered a director known for patience and intelligence, rather than the aggressive behavior sometimes associated with major movie sets. That reputation made his sudden loss even more painful. His career had reached a level where studios trusted him with prestigious, expensive productions, yet he retained the sensitivity of someone still fascinated by character. The operation was supposed to address a dangerous illness. Instead, a post-operative complication created a crisis that ended his life. Number 19. Sam Moore. When Sam Moore opened his mouth to sing, subtlety was rarely the point. As one half of Sam and Dave, his powerful gospel-influenced voice helped create some of soul music's most explosive recordings. Songs such as Soul Man and Hold On I'm Comin' became permanent pieces of American popular culture, influencing rock singers and soul performers for generations. Moore remained connected to music remarkably late in life, but in January 2025, news came that the 89-year-old singer had passed away while recovering from surgery. The Associated Press reported that his death resulted from complications during that recovery. For music historians, Moore represented a direct link to the golden period of Stax Records, when rhythm and blues recordings from Memphis were reshaping popular music. His partnership with Dave Prater was famously complicated, but the sound they created together was undeniable. Even listeners who could not immediately name Sam Moore often knew his voice within seconds. His final medical struggle therefore closed a career that had lasted across enormous cultural changes, from segregated touring circuits to presidential events and Rock and Roll Hall of Fame recognition. Number 20. Thea White. Sometimes a performer becomes famous without most viewers ever seeing her face. Thea White accomplished exactly that, through the nervous, loving voice of Muriel Baga in Cartoon Network's Courage the Cowardly Dog. To children who grew up with the series, Muriel was the emotional safe place in a world filled with strange creatures, bizarre visitors, and intentionally unsettling adventures. In 2021, White underwent surgery connected to liver cancer. According to family accounts reported after her death, she developed an infection following the procedure. She passed away at 81. The announcement generated an unexpectedly emotional response online. Animation fans had spent years hearing White's comforting performance without necessarily knowing much about the woman behind it. Her death changed that. Tributes revealed a performer with experience far beyond one cartoon character and reminded viewers how much voice actors contribute to childhood memories. Muriel's gentle Scottish accent could transform even the strangest episode into something strangely reassuring. That contrast made White's final medical experience especially sad. Surgery had been part of her treatment for a serious disease, but complications developed instead of the recovery everyone hoped for. Number 21. Tony Ganios. A tough-looking face made Tony Ganios perfect for the kind of movies that needed a physically imposing character who could still make audiences laugh. He became best known as Anthony Meat Tuparello in Porky's, appeared in The Wanderers, and later turned up opposite Bruce Willis in Die Hard 2. Although he stepped away from regular acting, those films gave him a loyal following. In February 2024, Ganios was hospitalized because of a serious spinal cord infection. His fiancée later explained that he underwent a lengthy operation to treat the problem. The surgery lasted for hours. By the next morning, however, his condition had changed dramatically. Ganios suffered cardiac arrest and passed away at 64. His death came as a shock partly because many fans had not realized he was seriously ill. To them, Ganios remained frozen in time as the large, intimidating young man from cult movies of the late 1970s and early 1980s. Social media suddenly filled with clips from films he had made decades earlier. That is one of the unusual effects celebrity can have on memory. The audience keeps seeing the performer young, strong, and active, while real life continues far away from the camera. Ganios' final hours revealed that gap painfully. A dangerous infection required major surgery, and despite medical efforts, his body did not recover. For cult film fans, the news was another reminder that the seemingly permanent characters preserved on screen belong to very mortal people once the cameras stop rolling. Number 22. Jackie O. A glamorous social media image can make someone's life appear almost untouchable. Jackie O built a large following through television, online content, entrepreneurship, and her relationship with entertainer DC Young Fly. She first became widely known through MTV and VH1's Wild 'N Out, where her personality and appearance turned her into one of the show's recognizable cast members. In May 2023, the 32-year-old traveled to Florida and underwent cosmetic surgery, commonly described as a mommy makeover. She returned to a hotel after the procedure, but complications developed. She was later taken to a hospital, where she was pronounced dead. The Miami-Dade medical examiner determined that her death resulted from complications of cosmetic surgery and classified the manner as accidental. The news became a major discussion online because Jackie O was young, active, and the mother of 3 children. Many followers had watched pieces of her family life unfold through social media and television. Suddenly, the polished posts were replaced by tributes. Her story illustrates why elective procedures should never be treated as completely risk-free, simply because they have become common in celebrity culture. The phrase cosmetic surgery can sound casual, particularly in a world where public figures openly document transformations. For Jackie O's family, however, there was nothing casual about the outcome. Number 23. Carmen Liccardello. Within contemporary Christian music, Carmen Liccardello was anything but a conventional performer. His concerts often mixed music, theater, storytelling, dramatic staging, and preaching, creating shows that sometimes felt closer to large-scale productions than ordinary Christian concerts. After surviving major health struggles earlier in his life, Carmen continued touring and recording when many people assumed he would retire. In early 2021, the 65-year-old singer entered a Las Vegas hospital for surgery to repair a hiatal hernia. The procedure was followed by serious complications, including internal bleeding. His condition worsened, and Carmen passed away on February 16th. For his audience, the news carried an additional emotional weight because he had previously spoken publicly about surviving cancer. Many fans had followed his health journey for years and viewed his continued performances as evidence of remarkable resilience. Then, a different medical problem led to an operation from which he never fully recovered. Carmen's career had been unusual even within his own musical genre. He filled large venues without depending on conventional mainstream radio success, building an intensely loyal audience through churches, videos, albums, and live performances. That audience had celebrated his earlier recovery. Now it faced an ending few expected. His final chapter is a reminder that surviving one dangerous disease does not make anyone medically invincible. After years of beating difficult odds, a surgical procedure for another condition produced complications that proved impossible to overcome. Number 24. Sheree North. Hollywood once tried to position Sheree North as an answer to Marilyn Monroe, complete with blonde glamour and major studio publicity. But her career ultimately became far more interesting than that comparison suggested. Instead of disappearing when the studio starlet era faded, North reinvented herself as a respected character actress and continued working in film and television for decades. Viewers later recognized her from projects including The Shootist, Charlie Varick, Seinfeld, and numerous television guest appearances. In November 2005, North died at 73 from complications following surgery. Public reporting offered relatively little detail about the procedure itself, making this one of the cases where responsible storytelling requires restraint. What is documented is the connection between the operation, subsequent complications, and her passing. That quiet ending contrasts with the aggressive publicity campaign that had introduced her to audiences in the 1950s. Studios once photographed, promoted, and discussed nearly every aspect of her appearance while attempting to manufacture a new blonde sensation. Decades later, the final moment of her life remained mostly private. Perhaps that was appropriate for an actress who eventually escaped the label Hollywood had created for her. North proved that she was more durable than a publicity gimmick. She survived changing fashions, changing genres, and changing generations of producers. Number 25. Tony Musante. Some careers are remembered not because they were enormous, but because the performer constantly turned up in interesting places. Tony Musante was that kind of actor. He starred in the groundbreaking police drama Toma, appeared in films such as The Incident and Dario Argento's The Bird with the Crystal Plumage, and later played the powerful Nino Schibetta in HBO's Oz. Despite his talent, Musante earned a reputation for making unusual career choices. He famously left Toma after a single season, even though the series had brought him considerable recognition. That decision became part of his legend. In November 2013, Musante died at 77 after experiencing complications following surgery. Reports did not widely publicize the exact details of the operation, so the most accurate account remains simple. He underwent a medical procedure, complications developed, and he passed away. For fans of 1970s crime cinema, European thrillers, and prestige television, the announcement reopened discussion of a career that had never followed Hollywood's safest route. Musante seemed almost suspicious of conventional stardom. Rather than remaining attached indefinitely to a successful television formula, he continued searching for different kinds of roles. His final circumstances were far less dramatic than many of the characters he portrayed. There was no criminal conspiracy, political intrigue, or Argento-style mystery. Only the unpredictable risks surrounding medicine and recovery. In a strange way, his career and death share one quality. Neither followed the path audiences might have expected. Number 26. Nick Benedict. Soap opera actors spend years putting fictional families through medical emergencies, impossible recoveries, secret identities, and dramatic hospital scenes. Nick Benedict knew that world extremely well. His television career included roles on All My Children, The Young and the Restless, and Days of Our Lives. He received a Daytime Emmy nomination and became familiar to viewers who followed daytime drama during its most influential decades. In July 2023, Benedict faced a real medical emergency. The 77-year-old actor underwent emergency spinal surgery. Complications followed, and reports indicated that his condition became increasingly serious. He passed away on July 14th, which was also his birthday. The coincidence made the announcement particularly heartbreaking for friends and longtime viewers. Benedict had not been a tabloid celebrity in his later years, so news of his hospitalization arrived suddenly for many fans. Fundraising efforts had been organized as his family dealt with both his medical situation and the financial pressure surrounding it. Then the hoped-for recovery never came. Daytime television is built around the idea that almost any crisis can be reversed. Characters survive accidents, comas, illnesses, and supposedly final exits, sometimes returning years later. Real medicine offers no such guarantee. Number 27. R.D. Call. You may not immediately recognize the name, but if you watched enough American films and television from the 1980s through the 2000s, chances are you recognize the face. R.D. Call specialized in tough, weathered characters. His credits included Into the Wild, Last Man Standing, Colors, Waterworld, and numerous television appearances. He frequently worked in stories where danger seemed to follow everyone on screen. In February 2020, the 70-year-old actor died after experiencing complications connected to back surgery. The news received less mainstream attention than the passing of a major leading man, but fellow performers and film fans quickly remembered the enormous amount of work he had contributed. Supporting actors such as Call create the texture of movies. They play sheriffs, criminals, fathers, workers, authority figures, and strangers who make fictional worlds feel populated by real people. Their names may appear below the title, but their presence matters. That is why his final medical chapter deserves a place here. After decades of appearing in physically demanding westerns, crime dramas, and action films, it was a real-life problem with his back that required surgical treatment. The procedure was followed by complications from which he did not recover. There is a quiet sadness in that contrast. Number 28. Alvin Lee. Few guitarists could make speed sound as exciting as Alvin Lee. His explosive performance with 10 Years After at Woodstock helped transform him into one of the most celebrated rock guitarists of his generation. The band's performance of I'm Going Home became one of the festival film's unforgettable musical sequences, showing Lee racing across the fretboard while an enormous crowd watched. More than 4 decades later, his death came with almost no warning. In March 2013, Lee's family announced that the 68-year-old musician had passed away from unforeseen complications following what they described as a routine surgical procedure. The statement shocked musicians and fans because Lee had remained active and had not been publicly associated with a terminal condition. Only months earlier, he had still been performing. The phrase routine surgery gave the story much of its emotional force. Every day, patients hear similar language and understandably expect to return home and continue their lives. Most do. In Lee's case, unexpected complications changed everything. His passing triggered a wave of memories about Woodstock, but focusing only on that one festival can undersell his career. 10 Years After recorded extensively, toured internationally, and helped define the blues rock sound that influenced later hard rock guitarists. Number 29. Tim Rose. Sometimes a musician's most famous work becomes more famous than the musician himself. Tim Rose spent decades connected to songs that traveled through folk, rock, and popular culture, including his dramatic interpretation of Hey Joe. His version helped shape the song before Jimi Hendrix turned it into an international rock standard. Rose lived a restless musical life, working in the United States and Britain and periodically disappearing from the mainstream industry before returning to performing. In 2002, the 62-year-old singer-songwriter was receiving treatment for intestinal cancer. He underwent surgery in London, but complications developed afterward. Rose died on September 24th. The news was another example of how surgery can represent both hope and enormous physical stress for someone already dealing with serious illness. Unlike a cosmetic procedure or planned orthopedic operation, Rose's surgery formed part of a broader fight against cancer. His body was already facing a major medical challenge before the operation began. For music fans, his death prompted renewed examination of a strange and fascinating career. Rose never reached the superstar status of Hendrix, yet his musical fingerprints existed in recordings heard by millions. His rough, emotionally intense vocal style also influenced listeners who encountered his work through later reissues. There is something fittingly bittersweet about that legacy. A performer can disappear from headlines while the sound he helped create keeps traveling from one generation to another. Number 30. Henson Cargill. One song can sometimes define an entire career. For country singer Henson Cargill, that song was "Skip a Rope." Released during the turbulent late 1960s, the record combined a memorable melody with unusually direct social commentary and became a major country hit. Cargill continued recording afterward, but "Skip a Rope" remained the performance most closely associated with his name. In March 2007, the 66-year-old singer was hospitalized in Oklahoma City. He underwent surgery, and complications followed. Billboard reported that Cargill died after those surgical complications. His passing did not create the enormous media storm that surrounds modern pop stars, yet country music historians recognize the loss of a performer connected to a distinctive period in the genre. The late 1960s had produced major debates about how directly country singers should address social issues. Cargill's biggest record jumped directly into that conversation. Decades later, however, his final days unfolded outside the spotlight. The contrast demonstrates how celebrity changes with time. A performer can once occupy radio stations, television programs, and concert stages, then gradually become a name primarily remembered by devoted fans. Medical vulnerability remains exactly the same. Cargill entered surgery with a problem doctors were attempting to treat. Rather than beginning a new period of recovery, complications developed and his life ended. Number 31. Lanny Flaherty. A face like Lanny Flaherty's seemed designed for westerns. Weathered, expressive, and instantly believable, it helped him build a career playing characters who looked as though they had already lived entire lives before entering the frame. Audiences saw him in Lonesome Dove, Natural Born Killers, Men in Black 3, Signs, and numerous television productions. He never needed leading man glamour to make an impression. In February 2024, Flaherty died at 81 following surgery. Reports describing his passing did not turn the circumstances into a sensational story. And that restraint suits a performer whose career depended more on craft than celebrity publicity. Flaherty belonged to the essential class of actors who make other people's movies better. When a story required a farmer, lawman, traveler, stranger, or rough-edged older figure who immediately felt authentic, performers like him were invaluable. That also meant millions of viewers could recognize him without necessarily remembering his name. His death prompted exactly that kind of reaction. People saw photographs, remembered scenes, and suddenly realized how often he had appeared in stories they loved. The medical circumstances were much less theatrical. He underwent surgery late in life and did not ultimately recover, bringing an understated career to an equally private close. There were no tabloid battles or celebrity theatrics surrounding the end. Number 32. Matt Clark. Another familiar face from American film history remained active in viewers' memories long after most people stopped seeing him regularly on screen. Matt Clark appeared in westerns, dramas, comedies, and major studio productions, earning credits in films such as Brubaker and Back to the Future Part 3. His weathered appearance made him especially effective in Western settings, where he could look completely at home beside some of Hollywood's biggest stars. Clark lived to 89. In March 2026, Variety reported that the veteran actor had died at his home in Austin, Texas, from complications following back surgery. His passing illustrates the long-term risks that can accompany surgery even when someone has already survived nearly 9 decades of life. For younger viewers, Clark may be remembered most easily from the third Back to the Future film. Older movie fans knew that appearance was only one stop in an extensive career stretching across many years. Like several performers lower on this list, his importance was cumulative. He was rarely the person on the poster, but removing actors like Clark from Hollywood history would make countless films feel thinner and less convincing. There is also something quietly ironic about an actor so strongly associated with rugged characters eventually facing a medical problem involving his own back. The surgery was meant to address that physical issue. Instead, complications became part of his final chapter. Number 33. Woody King Jr. Not every celebrity legacy is built in front of a camera. Some people change entertainment by creating the stage on which everybody else gets a chance to stand. Woody King Jr. was one of those figures. As founder of New Federal Theater in New York, he spent decades developing and presenting work by Black playwrights, actors, and directors. His theater helped nurture artists and stories that mainstream institutions had often overlooked. In January 2026, King died at 88 following complications from emergency heart surgery. The Associated Press reported his passing, while colleagues across American theater reflected on an influence that reached far beyond his own performances. King's importance is difficult to reduce to one famous production. His real achievement involved infrastructure, creating opportunities, producing plays, preserving voices, and opening doors in an industry where access could determine whether an artist's work was ever seen. That makes his final medical emergency feel especially abrupt. Even in his 80s, King represented continuity between generations of American theater. Younger creators could trace opportunities back to institutions he had helped build decades earlier. Then, an urgent heart problem required surgery. Emergency procedures leave little time for preparation, and the operation was followed by complications his body could not overcome. Unlike a screen star, King did not leave behind a single universally recognized character. His legacy lives through something broader: performers, playwrights, directors, and audiences, influenced by the spaces he created. Number 34. Helen Sif. You could watch Helen Sif for years without realizing how extensive her career had become. She belonged to that remarkable group of character performers who could appear for a few minutes and make a scene feel instantly more specific. Her credits stretched across television and film, eventually including the Coen brothers' Hail, Caesar, along with numerous smaller appearances. Sif continued acting into advanced age, demonstrating the kind of professional persistence that rarely produces celebrity headlines but earns enormous respect within the industry. In December 2025, she died at 88. Reports stated that her passing resulted from complications following surgery for an illness. Specific medical details were not made central to the public announcement, and there is no need to invent what was not disclosed. The essential documented fact is that she underwent surgery and complications followed. That simplicity says something about the difference between a private life and a public career. Audiences are often curious about every detail when a recognizable performer dies, yet families do not owe strangers a complete medical record. Sif's work is more useful to remember. She built a career not by becoming a permanent leading lady, but by saying yes to character roles, supporting parts, and brief appearances that accumulated across decades. Her final operation arrived after a remarkably long working life. The complications ended that life, but they cannot erase the strange immortality character actors achieve. Their names may occasionally be forgotten, yet their faces keep reappearing whenever old films and television episodes are watched again. For Helen Sif, that means the performance continues long after the patient left the hospital for the final time. Number 35. Craig Zadan. Some of Hollywood's biggest modern musicals carried Craig Zadan's fingerprints, even when most moviegoers never saw his face. Working closely with producer Neil Marin, Zadan helped bring projects such as Chicago, Hairspray, and a series of ambitious live television musicals to audiences. Their productions collected awards and helped convince networks that large-scale musical broadcasts could still attract enormous attention. In August 2018, the 69-year-old producer died unexpectedly. Reports revealed that Zadan had recently undergone shoulder replacement surgery and that complications following the procedure were connected to his passing. The detail stunned colleagues because shoulder surgery does not immediately sound like the beginning of a life-ending medical crisis. That assumption is precisely what makes cases like this so unsettling. Major medical complications are statistically uncommon in many procedures, but uncommon does not mean impossible. Zadan had spent his professional life managing complicated productions involving enormous casts, budgets, schedules, musicians, dancers, and live broadcasts where mistakes could not simply be edited away. He understood risk professionally. Yet the risk that ended his life arrived through a medical procedure far removed from a television control room or movie set. Tributes from NBC, Broadway figures, actors, and producing partners emphasized his enthusiasm for musical theater and his ability to transform stage properties into mainstream entertainment. His death left Neil Marin without the collaborator with whom he had built decades of work. A shoulder operation sounded routine compared with producing live television. In Zidane's case, however, the quieter challenge became the one with consequences nobody could reverse. Number 36. Olivia Goldsmith. Millions of people encountered Olivia Goldsmith's imagination without necessarily recognizing her name. She wrote The First Wives Club, the best-selling novel that became the enormously popular 1996 film starring Bette Midler, Goldie Hawn, and Diane Keaton. Its story of women rebuilding their lives after being discarded by powerful husbands became a cultural phenomenon. Goldsmith's own life ended under circumstances that seemed shockingly disproportionate to the procedure involved. In January 2004, the 54-year-old author entered a New York medical facility for elective cosmetic surgery involving her chin. During the procedure, she experienced a severe medical crisis while under anesthesia. She was transferred to a hospital but never recovered and died days later. Reports described complications involving anesthesia as central to the tragedy. The news attracted attention partly because the operation had not been required to treat a life-threatening disease. Goldsmith had voluntarily entered surgery expecting a cosmetic change and instead suffered a catastrophic outcome. That distinction made the case part of a broader conversation about how people perceive elective procedures. Celebrity culture can make cosmetic treatment appear almost as casual as changing clothes, especially when transformations are presented through polished photographs. Surgery remains surgery. For Goldsmith, the risk became devastatingly real. Number 37. Solange Magnano. Beauty pageant culture is built around transformation, presentation, and the idea that appearance can change a person's future. Solange Magnano had already reached one of the highest levels of that world when she was crowned Miss Argentina in 1994. Years later, she remained involved in fashion and modeling while raising a family. In 2009, the 38-year-old underwent a cosmetic procedure known as glutoplasty in Buenos Aires. Shortly afterward, her health deteriorated. Magnano spent several days in critical condition before dying from a pulmonary embolism reported in connection with complications following the procedure. The case generated international headlines because she was young, well known in Argentina, and undergoing elective cosmetic treatment rather than surgery for a terminal disease. Her passing quickly became part of a wider debate about cosmetic surgery safety. But the public debate can sometimes obscure the human scale of what happened. Magnano was a mother whose children expected her to come home. A former beauty queen's image made the story internationally newsworthy, yet fame had nothing to do with the loss experienced by her family. The circumstances also reveal the danger of treating any elective operation as completely predictable. Modern cosmetic procedures are performed successfully on huge numbers of patients, but complications can still occur, and individual medical factors matter. For someone whose public identity had once been defined by physical beauty, the ending carried a cruel association with appearance. Still, it would be unfair to reduce Magnano to the procedure that preceded her death. She had a life and career before entering the clinic. The operation became famous only because she never received the chance to continue them afterward. Number 38. Pete Cosi. Rock audiences often celebrate the guitarist standing at the front of the stage. But Pete Cosi built his reputation by playing sounds so strange and intense that traditional ideas about lead guitar almost stopped applying. His career connected him with blues giants such as Muddy Waters and Howlin' Wolf before Miles Davis recruited him during one of the trumpeter's most experimental electric periods. Cosi's distorted guitar work helped shape recordings and concerts that initially confused some jazz listeners but later became enormously influential. In May 2012, the 68-year-old guitarist died from complications following surgery. The public details surrounding the specific procedure remained limited, but his passing prompted musicians and critics to reassess just how adventurous his playing had been. Cosi was not a conventional celebrity. He could walk down many streets without being recognized. Within certain musical circles, however, his reputation was immense. He treated effects pedals, distortion, unusual tunings, and electric noise as musical tools at a time when some jazz traditionalists considered those sounds almost offensive. That willingness to experiment made him an ideal collaborator for Miles Davis. His final medical chapter, by contrast, contained none of that improvisational freedom. Surgery depends on planning, precision, and careful recovery. Despite those efforts, complications developed, and Cozy did not survive. There is a strange musical metaphor in the difference. His art thrived on unpredictability. His medical treatment encountered the kind of unpredictability nobody wanted. Number 39. Rita McNeil. Long before international audiences embraced singers who refused to look like conventional pop stars, Rita McNeil had already built a career by doing exactly that. The Canadian singer-songwriter came from Cape Breton, Nova Scotia, and turned personal vulnerability into a strength. Songs including Flying on Your Own and Working Man gave her an audience far beyond her hometown. At one point, she became one of Canada's most commercially successful country performers. In April 2013, McNeil died at 68 after complications from surgery. The announcement surprised fans because she had reportedly been making plans for future performances. Rather than gradually retiring from public life, she still had music ahead of her. Her death led to an outpouring of affection across Canada, especially in Atlantic communities where McNeil had become much more than a singer. She represented the possibility that someone could succeed without fitting the physical image the entertainment industry typically demanded. That achievement had required enormous resilience. McNeil had spoken about insecurity, rejection, and difficult experiences while continuing to perform in front of large audiences. The operation that preceded her death was different from those professional challenges. Determination could not simply overpower a medical complication. Her story also warns against interpreting recovery as guaranteed just because a planned procedure is completed. Surgery is only one stage. What happens afterward can be equally important. McNeil's body encountered complications that turned the expected recovery period into her final days. Number 40. Phil May. British rock in the 1960s produced so many legendary bands that even genuinely influential groups could become overshadowed. The Pretty Things were one of them, and Phil May was their unmistakable frontman. Formed in the early 1960s, the band developed a raw rhythm and blues sound before moving into psychedelia. Their album SF Sorrow later gained recognition as one of rock's pioneering narrative concept albums. David Bowie admired the group enough to cover their songs. May continued carrying that musical legacy for decades. Then, in 2020, an accident changed everything. The 75-year-old singer suffered a cycling fall that injured his hip. Surgery was required. According to a statement from the band's management, complications followed the operation, and May died in May 2020. His passing drew tributes from musicians who understood just how important the Pretty Things had been. The band never reached the permanent mass-market fame of the Beatles or Rolling Stones, but their willingness to become louder, stranger, and more experimental left marks all over later rock music. May's final circumstances seem painfully ordinary beside that wild musical history. There were no legendary rock and roll excesses or dramatic stage events involved. An older man fell from a bicycle, required surgery, and encountered complications afterward. That is often how mortality ignores reputation. Number 41. Ismail Merchant. Behind some of the most elegant films of the late 20th century stood a producer famous for accomplishing something that often seems impossible in filmmaking: creating expensive-looking art on surprisingly controlled budgets. Ismail Merchant's partnership with director James Ivory lasted more than 4 decades. Merchant Ivory Productions became practically its own genre, producing films including A Room with a View, Howard's End, and The Remains of the Day. Their stories were sophisticated, visually refined, and filled with actors delivering some of their finest work. In May 2005, Merchant was hospitalized in London and underwent surgery for abdominal ulcers. He died at 68 shortly afterward. For the film world, the timing was devastating. The Merchant-Ivory partnership had become one of cinema's most enduring collaborations, lasting longer than many Hollywood studios kept entire executive teams intact. Merchant was widely remembered as the practical force who could somehow turn artistic ambition into a finished movie. That makes his final medical experience especially poignant. a man famous for solving logistical problems, entered a situation where money, planning, reputation, and professional ingenuity could offer no guaranteed solution. Surgery was meant to address the physical problem caused by his ulcers. Instead, his health failed in the immediate aftermath. His death ended one half of an extraordinary filmmaking partnership, but the movies remained. Every immaculate room, carefully arranged costume, and emotionally restrained performance in those productions preserves evidence of the producer, who spent decades proving that intelligence and persistence could create cinematic luxury without Hollywood-sized excess. Number 42. Gerry Mulligan. One instrument became almost impossible to discuss in modern jazz without eventually mentioning Gerry Mulligan. The baritone saxophone can appear large and unwieldy, but Mulligan played it with an ease that helped redefine what the instrument could do. His arranging work also connected him to landmark projects involving Miles Davis, while his own ensembles became central to the development of cool jazz. By the 1990s, Mulligan had spent nearly half a century influencing musicians. In January 1996, the 68-year-old saxophonist died following complications associated with surgery and a serious knee problem. His wife reported complications from a knee infection, while other accounts described the death in connection with surgery. Mulligan had also been dealing with liver cancer, demonstrating how final medical events can involve several overlapping health problems rather than one simple cause. That complexity is worth emphasizing. Celebrity lists often reduce a death to a dramatic sentence because simplicity attracts attention. Real bodies rarely cooperate with simple stories. His musical legacy, fortunately, is much easier to identify. Listen to the recordings he made with trumpeter Chet Baker, and the unusually light sound of their pianoless quartet still feels modern. His arrangements with Miles Davis also contributed to sessions later collected as Birth of the Cool. Mulligan helped create a musical language built around restraint, space, and intelligence rather than sheer volume. Number 43. Harold Huber. Classic film fans may recognize Harold Huber as soon as his face appears, even if the name takes longer to surface. His career also extended into radio and television, giving him a level of recognition that crossed several entertainment formats. In September 1959, Huber entered surgery. He died during the operation at only 49 years old. The circumstances feel especially striking because of his age. Unlike many people on this list, who underwent major procedures in their 70s or 80s, Huber had not yet reached 50. His death abruptly ended a career that could easily have continued into the television-heavy 1960s. Old Hollywood's character actors often worked at astonishing speed. A performer could appear in several films within a single year, moving from studio to studio and role to role without the enormous publicity campaigns modern actors receive. Huber followed that tradition. That type of career creates a peculiar immortality. The performer may become less famous than the films themselves, yet his face keeps appearing on late-night television and streaming services decades after his death. Huber never reached the later stages of that career in life. Surgery ended it suddenly in 1959, but the pace at which he had worked ensured that viewers would continue stumbling across him for generations afterward, often asking the same question, "Where have I seen that man before?" Number 44. George Gershwin. Imagine composing music so enduring that nearly 90 years after your death, orchestras, jazz musicians, singers, Broadway performers, and filmmakers are still reinventing it. George Gershwin accomplished that before reaching 40. Alongside his brother Ira, he created songs that became American standards, while major works such as Rhapsody in Blue, An American in Paris, and Porgy and Bess blurred boundaries between popular song, jazz, musical theater, and concert music. Then, in 1937, something changed. Gershwin began suffering troubling neurological symptoms, including severe headaches and unusual sensory experiences. His condition deteriorated rapidly. A brain tumor was eventually identified, and emergency surgery became necessary. On July 11th, doctors attempted to remove the tumor. Gershwin died that morning at only 38. Some accounts describe him as dying during the operation. Other biographical records emphasize that the tumor was removed before his death later that morning. What is beyond dispute is how closely his passing was tied to the emergency neurosurgery and the advanced brain disease that required it. The speed of the decline shocked the musical world. At 38, Gershwin had already written works other composers would have been proud to produce across an entire lifetime. There should have been decades more. Instead, audiences were left imagining the music he might have created. The procedure became the final desperate effort to save a composer whose melodies would ultimately survive far longer than anyone in that operating room. Number 45. Maurice Ravel. The final story reaches even further back and involves a composer whose music sounds so controlled that his medical decline feels especially cruel. Maurice Ravel created works built on extraordinary precision, color, and structure. His Bolero became one of the most recognizable orchestral compositions ever written, repeating a simple pattern while gradually building an enormous musical machine around it. But during the 1930s, Ravel began experiencing serious neurological problems. His ability to write, speak, and coordinate certain actions deteriorated even though aspects of his musical imagination appeared to remain intact. Doctors struggled to determine exactly what was happening. In December 1937, with his condition worsening and treatment options extremely limited, Ravel underwent exploratory brain surgery. The operation did not restore him. Reports describe a brief initial response followed by a coma. He died on December 28 at 62. Even today, researchers have debated the exact neurological disease that caused his decline, which makes it important not to pretend modern certainty exists where it does not. The surgery was an attempt to understand and possibly relieve a devastating condition at a time when brain imaging technology was nowhere near what doctors possess today. Instead, it became the final medical intervention of his life. The circumstances carry a painful artistic irony. Here was a composer famous for absolute control over musical detail, gradually losing control over the basic functions required to communicate his ideas. Then surgery offered one final possibility and failed to return him to the world outside the hospital. Fame can buy private hospitals, famous doctors, and every available treatment, but it can never make surgery completely predictable. These 45 stories are not reasons to fear medicine. They are reminders that even familiar procedures carry risks, and every medical case is different. Which celebrity's story surprised you the most? Tell us in the comments. If you enjoyed this look behind the headlines, like the video, subscribe to the channel, and stay with us for more forgotten celebrity history.